Hello and good morning from Hong Kong. I'm sitting down today with Fredrik Oqvist and John Skalin, two very good friends of mine and contributors widely to the Auki project. John is with a company called Panartis, and Fredrik is a new C-level here at Auki. And we are going to be talking about perspectives on China, AI, and robotics. Kicking this off, I was hiking with John last night, and John, you had an interesting prediction about how AI is going to impact the Chinese economy in particular. You were making the case, uh, well, among other things, that the much better translation that is made possible by LLMs now will open up Western markets more to China, but also uh, that we need to think a little bit about barriers to entry and how much easier it's going to be for uh, Chinese entrepreneurs to get into business. Could you expand on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's I have a background in e-commerce, and it's been a very clear disadvantage for Chinese companies selling in the West, translations and branding. And I think the translations provided by new AIs like DeepSeek, who's widely available in China now, is going to improve the communication for Chinese companies a lot. Uh, Compared to traditional translators like Baidu Translate or Google or things like this. So I think that's going to make a big difference. It's going to be less obvious what sellers on Amazon and similar platforms are Chinese. It's going to improve that aspect by a lot, I think. And I think also another thing that we talked about yesterday that's interesting is that information sharing in China is not really the same way as it works in the West. Uh, Information is much more proprietary. It's you don't if you search on Baidu, it's very hard to find out detailed instructions on how to do online marketing or find out how to do things basically. Um, and I think this is also something that DeepSeek is going to have a very big impact on for Chinese businesses. Information is going to be a lot more accessible.
So what does that mean specifically that information will be more accessible? I guess you're making the case that on the Western English speaking internet, there's a lot of information to help you get started making a business. But there is less information like that on the Chinese internet. But now it is available inside of AI.
Exactly, yeah.
So, what do you think this will mean at a macroeconomic scale?
Well, I think that you're able to do research and find things out much better, and you'll be able to learn how to get things started in a very new way. Try be able to do new things that previously required basically that you hired somebody that had experience doing it. Very much, like the grinding of startups very much relies on the ability to learn a lot of things quickly, and this wasn't as easy in China before as it's going to be now when you have access to this.
So basically, the prediction would be an explosion of Chinese startups that also have access, should they choose, to the Western market in a way that they didn't have before.
Absolutely, yeah, and also higher success rate because companies that failed for not being able to do things successfully previously, I think they're gonna have a much higher success rate when they have access to learning through AI in a new way.
To get a little bit of background on your perspective, John, maybe you could introduce yourself, how long you've been in China, and the work you do at Panartis.
Absolutely. So I started my first business in China 2006. Uh, I've I've been an entrepreneur since I was 19, and I have had started more than 10 companies by now. It's been in a lot of different industries, but I would say that the common denominator is e-commerce, and that's what I've done the most. Right now, since 2015, we've had a company called Panartis that does supply chain services, logistics, and like a brand factory in China. So we help Western brands to develop products and to source and produce them and make sure that the quality is okay. And we also do worldwide distribution and logistics from our warehouse in China. We have offices in Chongshan, Hong Kong, Japan, Dubai, and Stockholm. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Freddie, maybe we could get an introduction from you as well. How long have you been in China? What have you been up to? What are you doing today?
Right. So I came to China the first time in 2008, and I've been sort of on and off most since then. Came originally to study, and then I worked as a consultant in finance, doing mostly VAE structures, corporate governance, and accounting fraud. Did a brief stint as a startup with accounting fraud and machine learning. Then the last few years, I've been working with teenage engineering, setting up and running their Greater China business mostly. And I joined, what was it, a couple of weeks ago now? So still pretty fresh into the sort of Auki thing, but of course I've known you for many years, and I've been sort of around what you guys have been doing for a while.
So, Freddie, what do you think about what John just said about this potential explosion of Chinese startups and the possibility for them to perhaps have greater access to the Western market? Is this an open and shut case, or are we missing some nuance here?
I think the tools are pretty open and shut. The tools are a lot better, and we will see an impact of that. The question is if the tools are enough better to mitigate other things. Like the translation thing is, I think, for all intents and purposes, for business perspective, for the Chinese companies, is a solved problem for them now. But you have other things, like you have some cultural adaptations, you have some other stuff that you might need to think about where AI will help, but I'm not sure if it's going to get them the whole way. What I think is really interesting on John's perspective as well is that he does talk a lot about like the sort of slightly more closed company secrets thing that we have here, where like you're less likely to share stuff like that. And that's certainly true from a historical perspective, but it is really fun and interesting to see that the Chinese AI companies are the ones that are open sourcing it. And I think that's very, very interesting. I also know from working with teenage engineering that there is a really big budding creative industry in China now, where it's a lot bigger and more vibrant than we've seen before. And I think we're seeing the same thing also with tech, and open source can really help sort of speed that along because they can then build on each other's successes, right? So it's a possible step ladder towards a really big explosion in the amount and the quality of AI models and applications that we're going to see in the coming years.
So I also came to China around the same time as you guys, 2009 initially, just after the Olympics. And when I first arrived in China, the meme was definitely that Chinese tech is still very young. They're mainly copying things. But something seems to have changed over the last several years. There's been an enormous acceleration, I think, especially since COVID. We've discussed this here on the channel before, that one of the interesting things is that China is now, in many regards, meaningfully ahead when it comes to AI and robotics, particularly robotics. I think the vertically integrated production stack in Shenzhen is really second to none. But we're also seeing just incredibly strong AI when it comes to anything related to vision and image generation. Models like Kling and Hailuo are incredibly competitive. And I have a pet theory that all of this actually kind of ties to what the West often calls the looming demographic collapse of China. As a result of the previous one-child policy, there's now a fairly lopsided demographic. There's an aging population. And any self-respecting country, of course, has to think about how are we going to take care of our elderly. There are really only three options. One is the unthinkable option, which just get rid of the elderly. The other is to have mass immigration, which China is not interested in, and the third is automation. And it seems to me that China has embraced automation and robotics at a very existential level. It almost feels like China is mobilizing to meet this um, this demographic lopsidedness, and it's just really, really invested in the infrastructure for automation itself, but also a lot into things related to computer vision and machine perception. The the positive spin on that is that they're doing that because they understand that there's not enough data on the internet to reach AGI, and machine perception is going to be absolutely crucial to having strong AI. Uh, the more negative spin on it is that China has been ahead in computer vision because they've been so interested in making sure that they have functioning surveillance and automated crime detection, things like this. And it could be a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Um, People forget that the biggest AI company in the world before OpenAI was the Hong Kong founded SenseTime, which specializes in machine perception. And now, just across the border here in Shenzhen, there are literally tens of thousands of active companies in the robotics ecosystem. Everything from parts to manufacture robot software. 10,000 of those companies were founded in 2023 alone. So there's a massive acceleration. John, when do you think this change started? Uh, when did China become so innovative? Was there a turning point, or has this been in the works for a long time?
I think it's been in the works for a long time, in my opinion. I think I think Chinese companies are incredibly fast at adopting new technology in a way that I haven't seen anywhere else in the world. Uh, I would say the complete opposite is Sweden, which it always takes a very long time for something new to make its way in. And as a Swede, having grown up in Sweden, being able to come to China and see the speed at which they adopt new technology and implement it is really astonishing. But I think that's a good testament to the innovation, that they want to change and they want to innovate and they want to move fast. And I personally think it's a great mindset to be a part of.
Yeah, innovation is not just tech. It's also innovation on business models and how to run a business, etc. And I would challenge anyone to disagree with the assessment that China is the fastest in the world with adopting new technology, regardless of where it was invented. But also that more and more things are invented in China. And interestingly, a lot of open source research is coming out of China, which is surprising to a lot of people. Freddie, why do you think that China has been embracing open source this way? Is this a China is coming to save the world kind of thing, or is there a nefarious plan behind open sourcing? Why are we seeing so much open source research come out of China?
That's a very good question, and I don't have a good answer. I tend to steer away from sort of utopian explanations where everyone wants to kumbaya and stuff. That's not really in my nature. So I would suspect that it's more to do with the fact that they feel that this is beneficial for them and for how they want to work throughout now going forward, right? I I have a pet theory with the open source stuff and where China's models are right now, in that they are lighter weight, they're more adaptable, and they're easier to deploy. And I think that is a competitive advantage for China for what they're trying to build. If you believe in what's been termed now like the machine economy, right? Whereas AI plus robotics plus vision is where we're heading. What you want is easily deployable models that can be using edge compute, that can be sort of more universal standards so that you get them out and you can also leverage this ecosystem that you have in Shenzhen while you still have the premier robotics ecosystem in the world, which it is. It's what everyone else is trying to emulate. It is in Shenzhen, it is in the Greater Bay Area. That is the gold standard. You have that now. How do you leverage that for maximum output? And I think open source models can be a part of that, because what you really want is adoption, and you want adoption in the use case that you're building for. And the use case they're building for is not necessarily the same as what you're building in the West with OpenAI, which tend to be larger, chunkier models, right? That's a little bit what they're optimizing for. So I think there might be something more in that area where you're looking to optimize for adoption.
It's interesting. You're hinting on China leaning more towards edge compute. Um, what do you think the reason might be that they are leaning on edge compute instead of bigger clouds like in the West?
Right now, I would hazard a guess that it's pragmatism. They are limited in how much compute they can buy in, and so they're sort of pushed towards edge compute a little bit, right? But also, edge compute is just it's a very appealing use case, especially if you're also building the robotic solutions, right? So you have a lot of things that are pushing them in that direction.
I think I read an interesting perspective that the U.S. has used money as a crutch a little bit. They've been able to throw VC money on problems and cloud computer problems, and
It's a really nice crutch to have, though.
it is. But when you work with constraints, constraints can beget innovation, and uh, edge compute is something that the West has talked about a lot for many years, because it has theoretical, economical advantages and technological advantages, but it is just so cheap and convenient to scale up cloud. Um, it seems to me that again, somewhere between wanting to invest in the future of automation and also wanting to make sure that uh, China's surveillance apparatus works, there's been a lot of investment in edge compute capabilities. Edge compute is a very important part of making sure that local surveillance works. And the largest centralized sensor network in the world now surely must be tied. I mean, I would be surprised if it wasn't tied somehow to the Chinese government. I mean, it's possible that the U.S. government has a larger centralized sensor network that they just don't talk about. But the centralized sensor network here is very visible. Like
Mhm.
it's easy, or it's difficult to count the amount of cameras that you walk past on a given day in Hong Kong or Shanghai or Beijing. Tons of cameras that are incredibly effective at what they set out to do. There was this lovely anecdote a couple of months ago with a tourist that lost something on a train and got it back later the same day because police could literally track the item across cameras. It had been stolen off the train, uh, but police were able to track it down and return it same day, which
I
is
think it says something that the most surprising part of that to me is that it was actually stolen. Like, I am 0% surprised that they could get it back. I am very surprised that someone tried to take it.
yeah, there's a lot of things that you can worry about day to day, but having your property stolen or getting robbed, something like this, is not something that you have even in the back of your mind walking the streets of China. It feels incredibly safe here. One of the things that I was uh, really shocked to realize when I first moved to China is I would have no problem letting my girlfriend walk home alone at night in Beijing, but I would not let her walk home alone at night in Stockholm or San Francisco or New York or any Western city, really. Um,
Yeah.
and that is another take on freedom, I guess. You don't have the freedom to not be surveilled, but you do have the freedom to move around and feel safe. Interesting
Your
trade.
day-to-day actions are very safe and largely unhindered.
John, China has been also over these last 2 decades, they are no longer the cheap manufacturing place. Like you don't come to China to make things cheaply anymore. Tim Cook has also pointed that out famously, that you go to China to get things well made, not to have them made cheaply. Where do people go to have things made cheaply now?
It's different for different industries. A lot of the garment production has moved to Bangladesh. Shoe production and like leather goods are famously moving to Vietnam. But they're struggling a lot with the infrastructure around the factories. Like the machines in the factories and the workers are good, and the price is very competitive. But sourcing materials, finding having reliable electricity and the parts for what you need to do is not working as well there as it is in China. China has a very well built out infrastructure around running factories that makes it very, very efficient. So it's yeah, it's different for different industries is the answer. But a lot has gone to Bangladesh and Vietnam. Vietnam famously has a very similar sort of worker mentality as China. So Chinese management strategies works quite well in Vietnam. So they can basically just relocate there and work the same way as they're used to. And that's not the case in a lot of other countries.
I mean, it's an interesting change for people as well, because what you're really doing is you're moving your supporting supply lines from being, in many cases, like for the Greater Bay Area, it's at max one city away, to now you're crossing barriers, you're crossing countries, you're extending the supply lines for everything. It just makes it harder to switch. I know one thing that also comes up a lot when I talk to people who are trying to switch production out of China for various reasons is just scaling production up and down becomes much harder. And that means that your manufacturing will be less flexible when you're starting out. And as a startup, or as someone who's like just starting up a new production line for something you might not be able to budget in a good way, like this, the demand, having that flexibility is extremely valuable for your business case.
So, for those that are not familiar, Freddie, what is the Greater Bay Area?
So the Greater Bay Area, depending, I mean, we're sitting in Hong Kong, so let's say it starts in Hong Kong and it goes up both sides of the river all the way up to Guangzhou. So it covers Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Macau, Zhuhai, Zhongshan, Guangzhou, Dongguan. And it is where a lot of the world's electronics is manufactured. And these days is a lot also where a lot of the world's best manufacturers are. And just like John said, this is very much true. I remember we got some pushback at Teenage Engineering because one of our newer products, the KO2, was produced in Europe, and some people in China were doubting the production quality because it was made by Europeans. And this is a change that's happened in the last sort of 5 years. They don't trust other people to make electronics as well as they do. And people need to be aware of this. This is a growing sentiment in China. We know how to produce stuff, other people don't.
Yeah,
Just an example of how good it is in the Greater Bay Area. A few weeks ago, we were building a mineral oil brake system for electric wheelchairs, and there was a very specialized part missing. Only one supplier in all of the Greater Bay Area has this, and that was located in a different city. We needed to get it done the same day, and we were able to get in touch with them, and they sent it over with a courier. 1.5 hour, we had these super specialized parts delivered. We were able to finish it the same day as planned, and deliver on time. And that's simply not the case basically anywhere in the world. It's very hard to do that anywhere else. But
it's the one place in the world where you can iterate hardware at the pace you iterate software, basically.
That is an excellent meme. The Greater Bay Area is the only place in the world where you can iterate hardware at the same speed that you normally iterate software.
It's such an
Uh,
insane competitive advantage. It's crazy.
do you think this can be reproduced elsewhere? What would it take for the West to recreate the success of the Greater Bay Area?
I don't know, 2 decades of constant investment in infrastructure, production capacity, and pooling resources in one geographical area. Or you have to bring down trade barriers among a lot of areas that are geographically close. It's just going to be hard. It's also one of those things where one of the reasons why I think they're pushing quite hard on this now is because they still have this, right? Some manufacturing is moving out of China, right? So it might be a fleeting moment. We don't know if the Greater Bay Area will have this production capacity in the same way in the next 10 years. Probably because they're building it out and it's a lot of investment. But we don't know that for sure. This could be a fleeting moment in time where just now this is possible to do here, and it's absolutely insane.
One stat that I think is perhaps overlooked when thinking about the Greater Bay Area and China in general is actually the logistics capacity. I like to point out to a Western audience that
The world's largest harbor, commercial freight harbor, is Shanghai, and the second largest one is Shanghai's second harbor, Ningbo, and 3 of the top 10 are here in the Greater Bay. So Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou are all top 3 ports. And having 3 of the top 10 ports by volume so close to each other, like they're essentially in the same city. The Greater Bay Area is technically smaller by area than the Greater Los Angeles area. It's around 2/3 the size of Greater Los Angeles, but home to 87 million people and 3 of the largest ports in the world. It's not just that all of this manufacturing is here, but it's easy to get raw materials here. It's easy to ship things out of here. If you wanted to reproduce something like the Greater Bay Area, you would probably have to do that at some Western logistics hub as well. And Western logistics aren't quite as centralized as they are in China, where almost everything moves through Shanghai and the Greater Bay. I remember a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, some big double-digit percentage of all floating vessels in the world would move through Shanghai on a given year. John,
Yeah.
you are doing more and more business in the Middle East as well. How would you describe the relationship with China and the Middle East? What's being built up in the Middle East? Is anything there going to be competitive with China? Or is the Middle East's ascent just helping China grow?
I mean, they're building astonishing things in the Middle East. We have our company. We have a local team and a local office there, and they are much more experienced with the local market there. But what I can tell from my experience is that there is a there's a big cultural divide between the Middle East and China. It's hard for them to do business together. And which is why we're able to. That's the opportunity for us to add value, to make sure that the products meet the requirements and are delivered as promised. And there's a lot of fear. I would say way more in the Middle East than any other country that we're working with, that they're going to be tricked by Chinese suppliers and things like this. And this is just simply a very outdated perspective. It's not the case. So yeah, I think that's there's a big cultural gap, which is the opportunity that we're able to work on.
I feel like there's been a big shift in cultural zeitgeist and largely ethics in Greater China since COVID. Actually, people's mindset have changed a lot, and the business culture around fibbing and telling half truths and things like this seem to have changed a lot. It feels like there's been, and perhaps there actually has been, a concerted push to increase the quality of Chinese goods and Chinese business. Um, it's hard to pinpoint exactly when that started, but I remember between 2009 and 2019, I was certainly a lot more careful doing business in China than I am now. My anecdotal sense is that people are more cooperative and collaborative now than they used to be, and they are more truthful now than they used to be, and that cultural attitudes uh, towards lying have changed a lot. Part of it may be due to the anti-corruption campaigns that have been top down. Um, Part of it, perhaps some kind of mimetic transfusion as people get more and more connected online and start interacting more with the West. Also, the interesting trend, of course, as TikTok got got banned, people started getting on Red Note, and you see more and more Western coverage of China in a different light now, but also Chinese people are more aware of the West than they used to be 10 years ago. Um, if you had to project this change forward, um, what's happening to both Western and Chinese culture? Are they drifting further apart, or are they coming closer to each other?
I think it's gone all the way around. Like I think when we're doing business with Western companies, we found ourselves waiting a lot, and that's never the case when you're talking to Chinese companies. Uh, Everything is super fast communication, basically around the clock, and you're never waiting around for things to happen or for answers. It's a lot faster than it is in the rest of the world. And I think in terms of half truths, I think it's years of experience selling to the West. The Chinese companies have learned what kind of service is appreciated, and is those companies that are doing it the right way. They are doing a lot better, and they've learned how the Western buyers likes it. That's my opinion. But I same as yourself, I've seen a very big improvement in this regard over the past years. But I think it started even before COVID.
We have some really big Chinese consumer and prosumer brands now that are dominating. DJI, for example, I think is dominating something like 90% of consumer drones and 75% of global drone spend. DJI also founded here in Hong Kong, even though they're not headquartered here in Hong Kong anymore. Um, what Chinese consumer products do you think we will see more of in the West over the next couple of years?
I definitely think we're going to see a lot more DJI. They're moving into the camera space more and more, and I think they're going to dominate there as well. I have to think a little bit about what other brands there are.
Huawei was one of the first brands that you started seeing in the West. I remember seeing a lot of 3G, 4G dongles from Huawei and the like in Europe. Of course, Huawei faced a great amount of backlash for geopolitical reasons. Have they bounced back from that, or do you think there's still low trust in the West for Chinese goods?
I've been out of the West for too long, actually, to comment on the West opinion on that. I think they've focused their efforts on capturing market share from Apple in China instead, which they've really done. when they release new phones, it's long waiting lines outside of the stores, and the products are sold out. And there's a big demand for the new incredible products that they release. Most recently, the crazy trifold phone, if you've seen it, very cool.
And of course,
I mean, I
Chinese
think if you're
cars.
looking, yeah, if you're looking for a vertical that's really coming, cars, right? And that's being led by BYD. I think also Xiaomi is going to do a big push there. I know they're expanding a lot. They're building out more things in Europe. They already have the consumer business there, but they're going to be pushing the cars there as well. Then you have players like Xiaopeng and some other ones. But BYD are really pushing hard. And I think a lot of people in the West who are used to mostly Teslas are going to be really surprised. This is essentially what happened to the car industry after COVID, right? After COVID, the lockdown restrictions lifted. The car company CEOs were finally allowed in, and the Chinese car brands had been running wild for the past like 3 years, innovating, and they came in and this went like, what in the world is going on here? We're in trouble, right?
The Chinese
So you
cars
now,
are incredibly high quality now. I think
yes,
BYD. I mean, BYD was around in the early days when I was in Beijing, but they were not quality cars back then. Now they are really, really nice.
yeah,
And the Xiaomi car was shocking, how well
yeah, that
put
was so
together
cool,
that
man,
was.
so cool.
And as you mentioned, brands like Xiaopeng are also doing great and expanding into robotics. Xiaopeng
Mhm.
revealed a humanoid robot that they are already using in production in their own factories. And I think a lot of China's competitive edge here has to do with battery technology. Um, China is just way ahead on batteries. Some people say, like, oh, they just stole knowledge from Tesla and the like. But that I don't
No,
think that's fair, because Tesla is actually using Chinese batteries, and BYD were making batteries before they made cars, if I remember correctly.
yeah, BYD started with batteries, then they moved into cars.
Um,
If you
the
had a
battery.
Nokia 3310 back in the day, those batteries were from BYD.
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't know that. So the old Nokia
yep,
batteries were made by BYD.
yep.
And what's the other big one? CATL or whatever they're called.
Yeah,
Big.
cattle. Yeah,
Um, yeah. I think that batteries are going to be more important in the age of AI and robotics than chips are, actually. I know that there's a lot of chest beating in the West that, oh, the West, we have the 2 nanometer chips or whatever, and China doesn't have those yet. But it seems to me that the chips that China have are good enough, and innovation in batteries is going to be more important for cars and for robots than innovation in chips. You can get very far with the chips you have, but you can't get very far with shitty batteries. And battery innovation is going to be very important. Do either of you have any comments on the battery industry?
Not really, to be honest. Uh, I don't know enough about it.
One thing that I find very interesting is with the scale of Chinese cities, it is economically feasible to do hot swapping of batteries in electric vehicles. So here in Hong Kong, we recently got new electric buses from BYD, and those buses hot swap their batteries so they can stay in operation. I think Shanghai famously has had this for some time with their electric fleet of taxis as well, where in just under 5 minutes, you can just completely swap out the battery in the car. And this is enabled, in one part, of course, it's very good battery technology, but also just the scale of Asian cities makes hot swapping a lot more viable. I wonder if we will see hot swapping of batteries for robots also in places like the Greater Bay. where within 3 to 5 years, when people actually start using robots as consumers, that just as I can walk into a 7-Eleven at any street corner here in Hong Kong now and get a battery pack for my phone and then drop it off at another 7-Eleven somewhere else, I don't think it's unlikely that we'll have a similar situation for robotics, that within a few years, a humanoid robot can walk into a 7-Eleven and swap out its battery. And then
there is one of the Chinese electric car brands, I think it is NIO. They already have hot swap batteries, and there are these stations where you can just go swap out your batteries. So even in tier 2 cities like where we are over in Chongshan, this is built out, and you see those stations pretty much everywhere.
Since COVID, we've seen operational drone delivery companies in China. In Shenzhen, you can famously get coffee delivered to you by drone. It seems to me that these kinds of things are still kind of science fiction in the West. They are much further along in China. Part of it is because they are better at drones. Part of it is because they're better at batteries. But I also think just a huge part of it is the viability of those business models in bigger cities. You can just reach more people in a single charge in a city like Shenzhen than you can in a city like San Francisco. And the Chinese are not poor anymore. In fact, one counterintuitive thing that I keep discussing with Westerners when it comes to robotics is that they are confused why there's so much robotic adoption in Asia, where labor is so cheap. But labor isn't that much cheaper here anymore than it is in the West. It is marginally cheaper, but not much cheaper. But the robots are so much cheaper that the equation for switching out, if a robot is a fifth of the cost and labor is 75% of the cost, then the economic incentive to switch out a worker in Asia and in China in particular is actually greater. You have a faster time to ROI here because the labor is only marginally cheaper, but the robots are, as much as just 10% of the cost of Western counterparts. I know that we're building a robot here at Auki now, tailor-made for retail use cases, and we know that we can build those for under $5,000. Like not even at scale. At scale, we can probably get the cost down much lower than that. And their Western counterparts literally sell for 5 to 10 times as much. Some of the more premium Western brands sell for over $100,000 a pop. So of course, if you can buy a robot for $5,000 to $15,000 that replaces labor that's only marginally cheaper than Western labor, of course you will see more robot adoption here. In South Korea, every 10th worker in manufacturing is already a robot, which is kind of nuts. I read recently from Western sources that the Chinese fleet of industrial robots caught up to America's industrial robot fleet in 2015, so 10 years ago. And in 2023, more than half of all, just slightly more than half of all robots, industrial robots that were sold to China. And almost half of all industrial robots in the world that are operational are in China, which is nuts. I think the latest figure I saw was 45% of all operational robots are in China, and more than half of all new robots are being sold to China. So the gap is widening and not contracting. Like China is really pulling away when it comes to robotics. They have to me, a clear lead already and are accelerating away. What could break?
It's one of those things as well. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
What could break this trend?
I mean, I think it's going to be really hard because there's a lot of things that you learn when you're on the shop floor. Like you're going to build better industrial robots if you have more industrial practice, right? You know the use cases, you can test them better, you have a bigger local market. I think it's quite probable that if manufacturing is moving back into the US, it's likely to do so with Chinese robots and quite possibly also by Chinese companies. I think that's the most likely scenario if manufacturing is moving back to the US. It's going to be China led.
But both of you have spent quite a lot of time in China. Where have you personally experienced robots in everyday life in China?
I come across a lot of robots here in Hong Kong and in Shenzhen. It's very common to have robot waiters here in Hong Kong. You get your food delivered by robot. Increasingly, you see robots for other things out and about as well, guidance robots and the like, 3D scanning robots. One of the big infrastructure companies here in Hong Kong is talking to us now about how to use this dog form kind of robot and drones to map out their infrastructure. And you see a lot of them. What you don't see so much is humanoid robots, but I think that's because humanoid robots are actually not that good for anything really. It
They're more
takes a lot of
expensive.
battery. Well, they're expensive, but they're also like not optimized for anything in particular. Like hands are great, absolutely, but being bipedal is actually uh, a huge drawback because staying balanced on your two legs eats up a lot of battery. So even though our Unitree dog robot and our Unitree humanoid robot technically use the same battery and weigh about the same, the battery range of the humanoid is less than half of the dog robot, and a lot of that is just the battery that goes to keeping the bipedal robot balanced. Um, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that humanoid robots are a very good form factor yet. Uh, Wheels are fantastic, and four legs is also very good. Um, but yeah, you see a lot of automation here. It was many years ago where you had fully automated convenience stores and things like this in China. It's it's just a bit of a bummer that the West is not more aware of what is here. And I think a big function of that is actually just Western hubris. We've assumed that the Chinese market is not big and attractive enough for Chinese companies to flourish by just selling their own products to China. And we don't go out of our way to translate Chinese materials to find out what's there. Uh, I know anecdotally, for example, that our good friend Caden, the CEO of Mentra, when he went to Shenzhen for the first time, he went to a conference and looked at technology for neural interfaces, which is a shared interest of, of, of Caden and I. And he'd been working on neural interfaces at MIT, and it said, anecdotally, that at this Chinese conference, he came across neural interface hardware that were easily 10 times better than anything he had ever seen at MIT, but there was not a single word about them on the English internet. They haven't had to. And I think there are many such cases where there is absolutely superior technology in China that the West is not even aware of existing because we haven't bothered looking and we don't translate what's happening. We just assume that China is not a big enough market to drive innovation.
Interestingly, this is where AI can actually help a lot, right? If you go to like the deep research stuff, you can ask it to like do a research sweep of the Chinese language stuff in this area. You'll get a lot of interesting things. I have a little pet theory where a lot of the current disassociation the West is facing is its own of its own making, where essentially for years they went to China asking for cheap stuff, and then they're surprised that what they get is cheap stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go and you ask for good stuff, my God, you will get good stuff, right? But only very recently have people actually started doing this.
Yeah. I think Apple was a big trendsetter there in realizing that you could get the best products in the world made in China. It's not just cheap; it's actually the best. People give Tim Cook a hard time for not being Steve Jobs, but looking at the performance of Apple stock, I think that Tim Cook has been a better CEO for Apple than Steve ever was, and Tim's secret sauce is being incredibly good at supply chain, and actually getting things made. And I think the kind of respect and reverence that Tim has for Chinese manufacturing should be more contagious than it is. I see a lot of cope and misinformation, and quite frankly, just racist ideas about Chinese people not being good at producing quality or not being good at innovation. That may have been true 2 decades ago, may have been true 1 decade ago, but it's demonstrably not true now.
Yep.
Maybe on that note, we should start rounding this off. This has been a nice little catch up talking about perspectives on China, AI, and robotics. I've been joined today by Freddie, COO at Auki Labs, and John from Panartis. Guys, thanks for hanging out. Maybe after this, you can drop your handles on Twitter so people can follow you if they're interested. Thanks everyone for listening in.
Thank you.
Thank you.